Good morning. This is the July 11, 2025 meeting of the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority. The minutes should reflect, as we call the meeting to order, that both Ruth Hepfer and myself are present. My name is Paul Novak. We will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I so motion.
Okay, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
It's approved. Entertain a motion for approval of the February 28, 2020, it says 24, but that's a typo, and we just approved the agenda. Should reflect 2025. Entertain a motion for approval of the February 28, 2025 minutes.
So approve with the change to the agenda.
Okay. All the record will reflect that that's approved. We're on to business, the first item of which is the introduction of new MSCA project manager, Stephen Ward. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, everyone. I go by Stephen Ward. I am a career military officer. I spent 37 years in the military with the Army Corps of Engineers primarily as an Army career officer. Super happy to be into this position. Very interested in tunnels my whole career, and so I'm excited to join MDOT and get started on this project. Thank you.
Wait, don't go yet. Can you just give us a little more detail about your background and construction projects you've been involved in?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I started in 1991 with the Army Corps of Engineers, and so as an Army officer, you start with actually Army construction units. So I did a lot of construction with Army construction units, pretty much all over the world. I deployed many times and did projects in the Pacific. I did projects in Africa. I did projects overseas, of course, in Iraq and those areas. As I moved up in my career, I was able to work for the Army Corps of Engineers in the Seattle District Corps of Engineers. Over there, I did some very large-scale projects at Fort Lewis and McChord Air Force Base. So I did some very large barracks projects, deployment centers, battle simulation centers. So very large scale for them, and I did that for about 5 years. I ended up as the Deputy District Commander for the Seattle District. In that process, I also deployed to Iraq and became the Gulf Region North District Commander for a short period of time. Stood up that district over there. We were in charge of a lot of projects over there, about $665 million worth of projects in Iraq when I was over there that we were designing and getting ready for construction. Came back, did some other jobs, and then ended up, fortunately, finally in Michigan for 15 years. I did a stint at Selfridge Air National Guard Base, so I ran all the engineering and DPW for Selfridge Air National Guard Base, so some very large MILCON projects over there. And then I moved over to the Army National Guard and did all the projects for the state of Michigan on all the armories and Camp Grayling, Fort Custer, those kinds of things. So I ran all those projects. Then I culminated as what's called the CFO for the state of Michigan, in charge of all the funding and auditing and contracting for the state of Michigan, both Army and Air. And then lastly, I moved over and I just became a government civilian engineer for the Army Guard for the last couple of years, and doing all the large projects there with our future construction. And we did a lot of the new armories that we are modernizing for female inclusion. That was a lot of great projects, and that was really good for the Michigan National Guard that we did. So I just finished doing that, and then I saw this opportunity, and I took it.
All right, Steve, it's a pleasure to have you on board, and I think it's a steal that we got you.
Yes, I would agree with that. I was going to say the same thing. We're very lucky to have you. Thank you.
All right, the second item under business is project permitting updates, the first of which is the MPSC permit. Devin, you're on board for that one.
Good morning, Your Honor. Chair, sorry. Devin Sullivan, Special Assistant Attorney General. As we discussed at our last meeting in February, the Michigan Court of Appeals issued its opinion affirming the December 1st, 2023 order of the Michigan Public Service Commission. Appellants filed applications for leave to appeal to the Michigan Supreme Court Answers and reply briefs have now been filed as well. The matter is fully briefed and awaiting action from the Supreme Court. There are several things the court could do. It could outright grant the application, in which case it would hear the appeal and the matter would proceed to further briefing. It could deny the applications. It could set an oral argument on the applications, what's commonly referred to as a mini oral argument, or it could issue an order on the merits based solely on the application briefing itself. Happy to answer any questions you have.
I have one question. Part of that whole permitting process with the Michigan Public Service Commission was a risk management plan. Have we heard any more updates on as Enbridge is formulating that, or any submissions on that?
We haven't received any submissions as of yet. We have spoken to Enbridge about it. My understanding is that they have been working with their contractor towards that risk management plan. It's required prior to the beginning of construction. Obviously, Enbridge can't begin construction until and if the permits are ultimately issued by the Army Corps, and EGLE will be touched on in a moment. But certainly that's something that we're continuing to ask about.
Investigate. And I guess what I would like, I'm sure some or all are aware that there was a recent collapse tunnel, similar tunnel boring machine collapsed in LA, in California. And they haven't fully understood the causes of that. And so I would hope we would consider what they come out of that all in keeping with our risk management plan as well.
Yeah, certainly. I think that highlights the importance of that particular submission. Dr. Mooney, if the board has questions, can probably speak a little bit more to the specifics of what happened in LA. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
The next permit that we are receiving an update on is the Army Corps of Engineer permit. And I think it's Michael that's touching on that one.
Yes, good morning. Well, there are two areas where permits are required for this project, one being the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'll speak to that one first. The permit review number for that project, by the way, is LRE 210-00463-56A19. Currently, the evaluation of the Army Corps permit is pending the completion of the NEPA review process. A draft environmental impact statement was published on May 30th, 2025 for public evaluation and comment, with a public comment meeting held on June 25th, 2025, prior to the June 30th end of the 30-day public comment period. That public comment period was abbreviated due to the January 2025 federal issuance of a national energy emergency. Army Corps' permit evaluation is now waiting on the release of a final environmental impact statement, or some people call it FEIS, and subsequent record of decision, or ROD. The former is expected to be completed by fall, per the Army Corps, with the latter coming 30 days later.
Okay. So we would expect final issuance of the Army Corps permit, if the decision is to issue it, towards the end of this year. Is that fair?
Yes, yes. Mid to late fall, if we could guess September, October, and then 30 days after that is the standard waiting period after a final EIS has been published before the record of decision.
Okay. If you can move on to the EGLE permit, and also, can you just state for the record what your position is?
Yes,
and-
please. I'm sorry. My name is Mike Belligan. I'm a NEPA specialist within MDOT's Office of Major Projects.
Okay.
Speaking now to the EGLE permits required, the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. There are actually two permits required for the project. One of them being the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination Permit, NPDES. The other being a combined permit for NREPA Parts 303 and 325, the former being wetlands, the latter being Great Lakes submerged lands. The Part 303, 325 permit was issued in February 2021, expiring in February of 2026, 5 years. The permit was subsequently appealed by various parties, with Enbridge ultimately agreeing to reapply for a new permit. Currently, a new application has been submitted by Enbridge, with EGLE determining that the new application is not yet administratively complete. After the application is determined to be complete, the public notice period will start, typically 30 days for that permit, or for the public notice period.
Okay. Do you know when was the determination, just from a timing perspective, when did EGLE issue its decision isn't the right word, but its characterization that the existing permit application is administratively incomplete?
I know the most recent correspondence was, well, for NPDES was in July, just most recently. The initial determination, I believe, was in, I'd have to confirm, I think it was in February of this year.
Okay, the Enbridge people will be up at some point, and I think
Yes.
they'll be able to.
I'm sorry, I can't.
I was going to
just
ask
speak
that
to the-
if Enbridge could
Yeah.
speak to that when they do their update.
Yes, there's in the application record. There's a lot of correspondence back and forth. I didn't note the date of the initial correspondence for that.
Okay. All right.
And then the NPDES permit is the other one required from EGLE. That one is being pursued by Enbridge as a permit extension that was similarly approved in February of 2021, expiring in October of 2025. Enbridge has requested and submitted a timely application for reissuance. So the current NPDES permit for EGLE is extended until EGLE formally acts on the application reissuance.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions as to
Any
those?
questions for me?
Not at this point, thank you.
Thank you.
The next topic under business is a general project update from Enbridge.
Yes, hi, Anna Mooney, Government Relations for Enbridge. And maybe I'll just start, I have a couple updates, but maybe I'll start with EGLE, just given some of the questions. So just to go back as well, so we back in 2020, when we applied initially for our permits, we applied in April of 2020, received our EGLE permits in February of 21. As was indicated by Michael, we have reapplied, and I think it's the last meeting we talked about, but we did reapply again, similar timeline, about April. I think as the questions, it's pretty common during an application that there are correction requests or more information to deem the application complete. And so that's been taking place over the last couple of months. We do believe that we have, as of early this week, a final correction request or deficiency request or information that needed to be submitted to deem the application complete. So really our best, estimate of when EGLE will deem that complete and then thus starts the public comment period is really in the next week or two, maybe by end of July. And so it could be a 30 or 45-day public comment period. But I think important to note that EGLE has a statutory 150-day period to make a decision on a permit that can be extended. Just giving context, the last time it was extended 1 month as approved by the applicant. So as the public comment period opens for EGLE, so we anticipate that opening here in the next couple of weeks, it's our understanding there will be public comment periods as well and an opportunity for the public to weigh in, just as the first time there was on the application.
And that public comment window is envisioned both for the NPDES renewal and for the Wetlands and Submerged Act permits?
They aren't. It's my understanding they're not tied together, right? They're separate permits, and I think as
Right.
indicated, MPDS is an extension,
Right.
and that'll be one that's extended for the life of the project, right? It has to continue to be extended. So that I can't speak to what that public comment period would look like. We do anticipate, in talking with EGLE staff, that there will be a similar public comment period for the water resource permit or the wetland permit impact as they had, back in 2020.
Okay. Any other questions on those updates?
Well, I have more updates, sorry, just on
Okay,
EGLE.
yeah. Well, I
But
just
on
wanted-
EGLE, if
on
you-
on EGLE in
Yeah.
particular, so you said 150 days, so we've got the 30-day, then you have 150 days to make the decision. That all would be coming in right now around January timeframe, is that kind of I was just kind of getting a picture of the timing.
Sure. I mean, 150 days, the math on that puts you by the end of the year.
Right.
But that's from when it's deemed complete. So I can't speak to a date, until they, once they deem it complete, they put it out for public notice. And then in that public notice will be what their public comment period will be, the length of it, what the meetings will look like, how they will receive public comment. And then, after that, similar to, I can get to the core process as well, but that it's then, the department reviewing those comments. There's a lot of interaction with the applicant on how we respond to, or if corrections need to be needed. So that's what takes place over the next, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
In terms of potential commencement of construction, I think the understanding is that construction commencement would occur within 180 days of the last permit issuance. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that's per the agreements. That's our requirement to begin
Right.
construction. Again, to have all those permits in hand first.
And just walking through the timing, the sequencing, would the contemplation continue to be that I guess at this point it would be either the EGLE permit or the Army Corps permit would be the last permit received that would trigger that 180-day commencement period. Is that your contemplation?
That's correct. And it's they are two distinct separate processes with two distinct timelines, but it's our understanding that there is, coordination amongst agencies, at least on and really over the last 5 years, a lot of the information we're also supplying to EGLE is going back and forth with the agency. So there's coordination, and as you know, it was a joint permit application when we applied to both the Corps and EGLE. So.
Okay.
As far as, if I can move on to the Army Corps, just to kind of add into Michael's update. So as he indicated, that public comment period was a 30-day public comment period on the draft EIS or the DEIS. So that was issued on May 30th. There was a 30-day window that closed on June 30th. During that period, they held, the Army Corps held 2 public meetings, both which lasted about 3 hours in length, I believe. So that draft EIS is a comprehensive review of the project, of the impacts, and I think it's important to note, while it's environmental impact statement, it's really looking at local, cultural, economic, and environmental impact. So it's a comprehensive 800-plus page document. I'm sure everybody in the room has read multiple times, but so the next step is that public comment period closed on the 30th. And then I should say too that while there were the 2 public meetings, there was also written comments that could be received by the Corps. So those comments are all been published online on the Corps' website, so those can be reviewed. And it's now the Corps' job, again, similar to the EGLE process, to review those comments, determine which comments require a response by the applicant, by the Corps, by the other interested parties or consulting parties. And so we will be working as the applicant, with the Corps over the next several months to, respond to those comments and where needed.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a couple more updates.
I was going to say,
right.
not in.
Just on permitting, I think I'm done with the
in regards
permitting.
to that. That seems pretty straightforward, but yes, go
Okay.
ahead with your updates. Thank
Yep.
you.
And then as far as the construction updates, we continue to integrate the team. So we have the Mackinac Straits Partners, which is our joint, our contracting team, our construction team. We also, as I think you'll hear later, are working to integrate, or will be working to integrate the state's IQA, so that third-party quality oversight to fulfill the role for the state of the oversight during design, engineering, construction of the tunnel. So that's underway. And then my last update is that we have a information center that's in St. Ignace, so just short trip across the bridge, that's open to the public. It's been open for a couple years now, but just over the winter months, we did a refresh. We took a wall down and we brought in a model of the tunnel boring machine. So the machine that we will order to actually bore the tunnel, we have a model to scale, obviously, of it in that office. It's a really neat space to see just kind of that fascinating technology. I think a lot of us, if you're not in the tunneling world, it's hard to envision. And so I don't have a visual here, but if you just take a short trip across the bridge, we are open to the public. Great information about not only the tunnel and Line 5, but really Enbridge as a whole. So again, reopened this spring with that refresh, and it's actually a replica of the tunnel, so you can view the tunnel boring machine like you are in the tunnel. So we welcome everybody to visit when it fits your schedule, but it is open to the public. So, and it's right in St. Ignace, just in the downtown street there.
Okay. And again, kind of a sequencing question. The ordering of the tunnel boring machine, can you give an idea of where the timing for that would be in conjunction with the permitting that we discussed already?
Yeah, that's a great question. That procurement of the TBM is obviously the next kind of critical or crucial, business milestone for us, and a large procurement. And so it's always been kind of having that certainty of permits. We do have, a little bit more certainty in timeline of the permits. So I don't have a date of when we are anticipating to start that procurement, but that will probably commence as we have permits in hand.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, just a clarification too, that there is quite a bit of construction that has to take place before we even start boring that tunnel. And so there's, building of the portals and everything that's been shared in previous meetings, but.
Right.
Yeah.
And continuing with my timing questioning, the contemplated amount of time between Enbridge ordering the tunnel boring machine and it actually showing up and being delivered to the site is contemplated to be how long?
I believe it's approximately 18 months, but I don't know if that's probably seasonal as well, and when it can be shipped through the channels and things like that. But yeah, that's I believe it's about 18 months, if not more. I'm looking to my attorney to correct me.
Okay. Additional updates?
That's all. Happy to answer any questions.
The one, backtracking a little bit to the MPSC, the risk management plan. Is there any, you have the Mackinac Straits partners, and obviously they would be helping you with that. Is that underway now, developing that? And could you give us an update on where that's at?
Yeah, I would say that work has been underway, probably, prior to that requirement even by the MPSC. I don't have a timeline of when it will be completed, but it is, as indicated, required to be, completed prior to construction. So.
Okay. And I guess it just, in keeping with that, with what we had happen out in LA, learning from, there's things that happen and there's experiences that can carry forward. I'm assuming that you incorporate anything like that into this risk management plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, I think that the public doesn't, but a lot of the details of that incident, obviously, terrible to hear about. I will say that was why we selected, the world-class team that we did. Just that level of expertise and level of safety and the highest standard was really been kind of the driving force for us in the project. So that's what we'll continue to drive towards. But absolutely, those types of risks are what we are mitigating against for both the design and engineering of the tunnel.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
The next item under business is Project Advisor Budget Report. Talia, I think you're up for that. And if you can give your full title also.
I can. Good morning. Talia Belill. I am an engineer. I work in the Office of Major Projects in our Innovative Contracting Unit at MDOT. And my role in this project has really just been to support the project manager as needed. So the project report has been included in your member packets. It was requested by the MSCA at our last board meeting to update the format of the report itself. So the revised report does include the current contracts grouped together, as well as the closed out terminated contracts, contracts that are going to be paid for by Enbridge, which is just the IQA, as well as our internal expenses. So summarized at the bottom, you'll see the appropriation total of roughly 4.5 million that was established back in 2018 for this project versus the costs that have been incurred to date. So there is also an encumbrant amount of contracts that have not been included in here. So that would bring the remaining budget to approximately 1.9 million. So there are supporting invoices as well that are attached to that summary sheet, which we apologize for is rather tiny, hence the glasses to read this. So I do apologize about that. There are some to be determined amounts that are also included in here. Ryan Mitchell will be up next to talk about the contracts. So those are left as to be determined, but we do actually have numbers for those. So Delve Underground for the IQA would be $950,000, and Craig Brownlee providing pipeline advisory services would be a contract totaling $226,000 roughly. So those would be completed on there. Again, Ryan will speak to those contracts and changes to the contracts after this.
Oh, I have some questions. If I can go ahead. Okay. Yes, thank you for the updates. I appreciate the new format and lining that up with the closed contracts and how you broke it out. So I do appreciate that. But in keeping with that, just looking at this and then just hearing the status of the permits and that we, in 6 months, if all the permits are secured, this project could actually move forward. So my question would be, we're looking at roughly 1.9 million remaining, and a lot of that was back a long time ago, and a lot of things happened, and inflation and things that we could not have ever foreseen. Do we have enough money to complete our responsibility, our job as the MSCA? Is there enough money in the budget with projected costs? Once you take away the ones that we're acting on today, if I'm doing the math right, that leaves us roughly $1 million in the
Correct.
budget, and for all other expenses, without even considering some of these other things that are on here. So if you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. No, based on if the permits are secured and construction begins, the preliminary numbers, we have been looking at some preliminary estimates for some of the items that are listed down below, as you indicated. And, Ryan Mitchell will discuss that further about our proposed contracts and contract amendments. That will really reduce that cost down. So based on that, no, we do not think that we do have enough funds that were allocated to the project to continue to project completion.
So, that being said, then we, at some point in time in the timeline, we should start evaluating when we need to look to go for additional appropriations, the triggers that we need to, and set up that timeline so that we have adequate funding to perform what we're required to do in oversight.
Yes.
So maybe, is that
Agreed.
something
So
we
an
can
action
add
item.
to discuss to the next
For
meeting?
for the next meeting, absolutely. I think if we can request of staff an evaluation and recommendation as to what supplemental appropriation amount would be contemplated to fulfill the statutory responsibilities of the authority, so that we can start looking at a number for purposes of doing that, and potentially making a request for it.
Yes, I would agree. I think we need to get that on the horizon for
Okay.
consideration.
Yes, that makes sense. We can definitely take that back as an action item on our end. Did you have any other questions related to the summary or any of the supplemental invoice documentation that was provided?
I don't, go ahead.
Go ahead. The only thing is that we have the closed out contracts, and I know you're using the remaining budget in there is available. I guess, I don't know, I think it's clear enough. It's fine. No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay, and promises to make it larger next time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we're now on to consultant contract updates. Ryan, you're up.
Good morning, Chairman
And
Novak.
again, just for the benefit of the audience, if you can give your full title and what your responsibilities are for the project.
Very good. Thank you, Chairman Novak. Good morning, Member Hepfer. Ryan Mitchell with Michigan Department of Transportation. I'm the administrator for MDOT's Office of Major Projects. I am the interim project manager, filling in for Mark Dubé, who's left service with the state, and preceding Steve Ward, who's joining us today. So, first item on the consultant contract updates is the independent quality assurance services that the scope of which and the procurement of which has been approved and the selection of which has been approved. That's for Delve Underground. We've reached an agreement with Enbridge for the funding of that work. And so we do have a scope included for a limited notice to proceed for pre-construction activities. The budget is $950,000 for work that may take place between now and when construction commences, should the project be permitted. So we request your approval to execute and execution of that contract.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion for approval of an execution of the contract with Delve Engineering.
I so motion.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion's approved.
The next item is termination of a contract. The Delve Underground, formerly McMillan Jacobs, was retained by the authority as tunnel design experts. They participated in the development, the joint development with Enbridge, as required by the tunnel agreement, of the project specifications. And because they will perform a function in construction oversight, we thought it prudent to not have them also in a role on advising on design specifications. They, if approved today, following termination, they would have a balance of $22,000 that would be available again in our budget.
Okay. Any questions?
Oh, I do have a
ahead.
question. So we're terminating their contract. Is there going to be a need for a new contract now that that's terminated? Are we going to need a new contract going forward? Question.
Yes, Member Hepford, our intention is to, there's an item E, 5E, related to an owner's representative, proposed scope of work that we've included. MDOT does not have regular positions. We do not employ tunnel engineers because we don't routinely build tunnels. It's becoming more common, but we still do not have that as a regular position. And so that's the reason that we have retained those advisors. Our intent is to include that expertise in that forthcoming, if approved, owner's representative contract. And I'll explain a little bit more about the broader purpose of that contract, but we do anticipate that those services could be included in that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this would require a motion for approval of the termination of the existing Delve contract for purposes that provided advisory services on tunnel specifications, if I'm characterizing it accurately.
Yes, please.
Okay. I'd entertain such a motion.
I so move.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
That's approved. So Delve is both hired and fired in the same meeting. The next one, pipeline advisory services.
Yes. Because of the conflicts inherent to this project and our aversion to those conflicts, our previous advisor, HT Engineering, that had been advising the project for many years, you may remember Dan Cooper, that firm was acquired by another company, a company that does business with Enbridge. And for that reason, we needed to terminate that contract because it's just generally not our policy to do that, to employ firms that are actively engaged in work with Enbridge, and so we are hiring, we request approval of a contract with Craig Brownlee. The number of firms with adequate expertise in this discipline is fairly small. And so, and then you couple that with the number of firms that do business with Enbridge, and it gets much narrower because it's pipeline construction expertise. So for that reason, we requested some guidance from LARA, Michigan's agency that oversees regulatory matters related to pipelines and other licensure, and they recommended Craig Brownlee. And I apologize for not knowing this off the top, but I believe you are familiar with Craig Brownlee's qualifications, and that following procurement, I guess you brought that to the board, and that was vetted and approved. So we've reached agreement with Craig Brownlee. We've negotiated that contract. The amount of the contract is $226,000. And we request your approval.
Okay. Can we have a brief recitation of Craig's background in this area? And Talia, if you want to step up to do that, or
Sure.
It's in the packet. is all.
I might have to dig through some papers to look at it. Craig was.
I'm doing it primarily for the public's, for the public's benefit.
He asked if he needed to be present, and I silly said no. And now I'm regretting that decision. Sorry, just bear with me for a moment here. This packet is thicker than one might think. I can speak to the contract, I don't know that I can speak to Craig's qualifications. I'm sorry, let me grab the mic.
While you're up there, I will.
Okay.
It was, I believe, the meeting that we held, it was not the last meeting, I want to say it was 2 or 3 board meetings ago when we introduced Craig to the board, and he was able to speak on his qualifications. So I don't know that I'll do an adequate job of speaking on his behalf, but he does have an extensive background in pipelines. He was able to work with us with the scope of work to develop what would be some possible things that a tunnel, and as needed pipeline advisor work that would need to be performed. So we did have scope verification meetings with Craig, had multiple conversations with him as we worked towards the draft contract that you see in your member packet. So there is a work plan that was identified in there, as well as like just the typical contractual language, as well as the price proposal, but the work plan leads itself.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks. So we would similarly need a motion for approval of Craig Brownlee's Pipeline Advisory Services contract.
You're asking for the scope, everything, the whole entire, I so move.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
That's been approved. We're on next to the Special Assistant AG contract extension. I don't know that we need a lengthy discussion of that. This simply extends the existing contract of Devin Sullivan's firm to continue the provision of those services. I'd entertain a motion for approval.
I so move.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
That extension has been granted. And finally, we are at the owner's representative proposed scope of work. Ryan, you want to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Mooney. Sorry, Novak.
Paul works.
Yes, so it's been proposed that you all, as the board, an agency within, but autonomous from MDOT, be provided with consulting engineering support, independent, not independent of MDOT, but as an extension of MDOT. MDOT's resources have been challenged by this project. Reaching into our environmental section and other support staff has been a bit of a challenge. And I think to ensure that with the I guess, greater obligations going into construction, that we have robust resources available and ready and dedicated. That's the key aspect of this request, is that these staff are dedicated. As directed by MDOT, MSCA staff, we'd like to request procurement of an owner's representative firm. Within the scope, in your member packet, you will see that there are several key staff that we propose as being particularly important on this project. They include a project manager, a deputy project manager, a tunnel engineer, public engagement and communications specialist, a document control specialist, and if I remember correctly, a tribal liaison.
Yes, it's in here.
So those resources are particularly important for this work to perform our oversight obligations and fulfill the obligations of the state in the tunnel agreement. We did discuss earlier that we have a bit of a budget issue. So I realize I'm making this request for approval of a procurement without the funds to properly fund it for its life. However, I would suggest that it could be funded in phases, and we could initiate the contract, or the procurement rather, with the budget for a limited amount and a not-to-exceed amount, and a limited notice to proceed for services necessary for pre-construction, similar to how we are engaging the independent quality assurance contractor.
Okay. The primary difference is that we would be paying for this one, though.
Correct. That is a primary difference, yes. And one is design support. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think this obviously needs doing, and that as part of the development of the scope and the execution of a contract, we would have a much better delineation of the amount that would be required to fulfill those contractual obligations to the authority over different periods of time between now and commencement of construction. From even commencement of construction would have what I'll call the pre-tunnel boring operations, and that point in time when tunnel boring is occurring is maybe being the next logical phase. I don't know, maybe those who are more adept in this area than I am would break it down even further. But my point is, we should probably quantify in the development of and bidding of this contract what each of those phases would be projected to be, and then loop that in, Talia, to the discussion that we were identifying that we will need to have in the October meeting to see if we can come to some conclusion about how much it's going to take to properly oversee this project if commencement of construction actually occurs. So all of that, I think, needs to be much more thoroughly quantified for purposes of the October meeting. Any comments or questions for Ryan?
So I just want to, from my understanding, so what you're asking is to go back and take this scope of services, break it into more phases, and quantify, obviously tying it to the budget of where we're at with the available funds we have that we can comfortably set up for like the initial phase and pre-construction. And then that way we can figure out what will need to be done post-construction. So limited notice proceed up to construction and then develop phase B or second phase and what would be required once we have more ideas. So, okay, I am in agreement with that. I think we need to sit back and look at that. I guess the question is obviously staffing is thin. You guys, I know, are stretched to the maximum. How does the timing work for you guys? That's, I guess, the question I have. With all those, if it waits till the next meeting, do we need something interim to help you guys?
Very good question. The immediate so following this meeting, had we received approval to procure, we have a draft scope, and we could then obligate whatever funds we had and procure. That has its own duration.
Right.
The activities that would immediately follow that would be, again, filling in, the most critical aspect would be filling in that gap of expertise on tunnel engineering. We do have Dr. Mooney. It's nice to have multiple independent experts on that function. But I believe that given the budget constraint and, again, this issue of understanding the timing better and the due diligence that you requested, I will say I think we have to come back with what you've requested.
Okay.
And I think we will rely on Dr. Mooney in the interim.
I mean, I just thrown out a question for Paul in the discussion, is it something we could do with a limit? I mean, because I don't know that the scope and then the staffing, you've been very thoughtful about what is needed in here. And we currently have, we just canceled one contract, so we do have a void. And it's gonna take time to procure. I guess, Paul, is it a possibility we could consider this scope with a limited notice to proceed of monies that and I'm just looking after all the other things that we just approved, we've roughly got $1 million of unencumbered funds in our budget. Could we use, like, say, $250,000 to do phase one or limited notice proceed at this point? And then that would give us an opportunity to get the process going, start filling that gap, and then we could proceed from there to additional scope and information that we need, for phase two, like construction. Just a thought.
I think that is how we would envision proceeding.
Okay.
I don't know what the applicable numbers would be in the different phases. That is what I think we're anticipating would be presented in the October meeting.
Okay.
I think I heard you saying that it might assist matters to do it sooner than October. Let me just ask to give either Ryan or Talia a reaction to what you think about doing something pre-October, and whether it would assist what we're attempting to do in identifying an applicable budget that would be necessary to appropriately oversee construction and pre-construction.
So I'm going to ask Talia to hold me accountable and correct any mistakes I make. But I believe, Paul, Chairman Novak, that we will need to procure and then request approval of the selection from the board. And so we could not have those services in place prior to the October board meeting unless we scheduled another meeting. That is a possibility for that purpose. But I will say, it will be a qualifications-based selection, and it will not, the budget of the services, as long as the market indicated that there was no objection to a multi-phase contract engagement, that we could recommend a selection at a forthcoming meeting, and then provide that information about the budgets of the various phases to you and seek approval at that time.
Just to be clear, you're saying we would move forward with the procurement phase so that at the October meeting, we would have someone selected, could present the qualifications and then present the budget there. And that would give us from now until October to work on the procurement, because even after October, and then that still, we would still have to execute the contract, which we could do quickly after that, but there is time. I apologize if this is not loud enough.
So go ahead, sir.
If I'm hearing it correctly, or what I'm reading into this discussion, is that the actual procurement process itself is going to inform what we had anticipated being presented in the October meeting of projected budgets for the performance of these items. And that if we advance that earlier, you wouldn't have the benefit of the procurement process to inform the budget discussion. Is that a fair? Okay.
I think that's correct.
And also, just to be clear with our MDOT practice.
Maybe,
I'm so sorry. Sorry, getting company up here, Ryan. And also, just to be clear, is that we would perform our own independent estimate of the consultant costs ahead of time. We've done a rough estimate. We would look at that, fine tune that as well. That's just part of our MDOT processes, is that we would not wait for the consultant to tell us, how much it would cost. We do our own estimate. We have meetings, scope verification meetings to work through those costs to make sure that we're aligned. And, if we've missed anything, if they're assuming something extra. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Talia.
okay.
I would also say that, given the constraint of the budget, I think we need to be conservative in the amount that we can
Commit to phase one.
correct, and so there's reserve funding for anything that we may need. But I agree, and I think it's a very good suggestion that having that market engagement between now and a recommendation will help us to validate that that's one, that there's interest in the market, and that we have proponents that would not be conflicted, and secondly, that it would be, it would be better informed.
Okay.
So, I believe I'm now requesting approval to procure the services of an owner's rep consultant to bring back to the next meeting a recommendation to initiate procurement, rather, and that will be accompanied by a detailed budget request or at least explanation.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from that is a motion to initiate an RFP process for the scope of service that's contemplated in the owner's representative consultant scope that was presented at this meeting. Is
To
that-
be refined as requested
Go
by
ahead.
the board.
Yes.
To be refined such that it would contemplate at least two phases.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for that qualification. Yeah, that's what I was.
Perfect.
asking.
All right, that motion is, I would entertain, and since Kim's not here, you've been busy on motions today.
I so moved.
All right, any discussion?
None at this time.
None other than what we've already
Yeah,
had,
what
which
we've
I,
included.
which I think was a helpful discussion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. We are now on to project specifications and specifically recommended changes to specifications. Dr. Mike Mooney is up for that.
Good morning, Chairman Novak, Member Hepfer. My name is Mike Mooney. I'm the tunnel consultant to the authority, and I'm here reporting on behalf of the Joint Specifications Committee, which is a 5-member committee on behalf of the MSCA. And just as background, the project specifications include the technical requirements for the tunnel as laid out, as you know, but just maybe just generally for everyone's benefit, the technical requirements laid out in the tunnel agreement, things like must be concrete lined of minimum diameter, specifies infiltration, water infiltration rates, those kinds of things. But it also includes construction specifications for the permanent structure of the tunnel that would then later be owned by the authority. And so this includes 10 sections. And by the way, there's hundreds of sections of specifications for this project, but only 10 sections are pertaining to the permanent structure that are considered joint specification sections. There are thousands of very specific, detailed specifications in those 10 sections. And so I'm going to give a brief on the few dozen requested changes in those specification sections. I will also say that it's quite normal to have revisions to construction specifications, particularly in tunnel projects. In this project, as you recall, the original contractor for this project was off-ramped, so to speak, and a new contractor was brought on board. The original specifications approved by the board were approved after final design and involvement of the original contractor. And so when a new contractor comes on board, they revisit things, they have preferences in how to construct things. Whenever dealing with a tunnel project, constructability is a huge component of designing. And so you revisit a lot of these things and specification changes come up. So that's kind of the nature of these things. It's quite normal, writ large in construction, but certainly in tunnel construction. So in your packet, you have a memo from Enbridge that essentially introduces these. You have a very detailed memo from Arup, the designer of record for the tunnel project, that lays out all of the specification changes proposed, requested. You have a memo, detailed memo from us, our committee, that provides our disposition on those. And then you've got the actual clean versions of the specifications. So in particular, 2 of the 10 specification sections have been addressed with proposed changes. These are the precast concrete tunnel lining. I'll say the acronym PCTL a lot in the next 20 minutes. So PCTL is just the precast tunnel lining. That is a key part of what becomes owned by the authority. And then excavation by tunnel boring machine specification. So we'll walk through those here. I think just to cut to the chase, so we have been meeting regularly with Enbridge, Arup, and then Enbridge's owner's engineer on this project, WSP, to review and discuss their requested changes. So we meet weekly, bi-weekly via conference call over the past 6 months or so, going through all of these, understanding them. And we find that these requested changes to be in accordance with tunneling state of practice, and as such have no objections to these specification changes. And so our memo summarizes these changes. I'm not going to go through some of these. I'm going to hopefully avoid tremendous detail, although I'm happy to go into as much detail as you like. The first one will be on the PCTL geometry, and you can see we put up a video here just to remind everyone of the essential construction process of a tunnel. This is not the Great Lakes Tunnel Project tunnel boring machine. It's not the liner, but it gives you a general sense for how these tunnels are constructed and provides some context for this first set of specification changes. So what you see here is essentially the tunnel boring machine installing these PCTL segments. These are pieces of a ring. You can see a segment being installed right there at the rear of the tunnel boring machine. Tunnel boring machine excavates usually 5 to 6 feet. It then pauses, installs the ring, and then repeats. And it does that over 4 miles. And so you can see in this particular case, you can also see these thrust jacks at the back of the tunnel boring machine that push off the leading edge of the assembled ring. And that's how the TBM, tunnel boring machine, propels itself forward to excavate the next cycle. And so on the top right, you see essentially the segments. These are precast segments. They'll be precast at a facility in Detroit, and then they'll be installed in the tunnel. And the bottom right is just essentially an installed set of rings throughout a tunnel. So if you could jump to the first slide, really, the first, the original, I guess the current PCTL specifications and the underlying original design envisioned a 6-segment PCTL ring configuration that includes 5 similarly sized segments. This is on the left-hand side, and one of these keystones. You see the small segment at the 12 o'clock position is what's called a keystone. And so that small trapezoidal keystone required the use of what's called a key restraint system during construction. So to prevent that small piece from slipping out at high pressures, which is the case on this tunnel, a key restraint system was envisioned by the contractor in this project and then designed for by Arup and then specified. With the change of the contractor, the new contractor wanted to go a different direction and wanted to go more of a universal ring, which is shown on the right-hand side. So if you can look at the left versus right, left is original, the right-hand side shows a 6-segment ring arrangement where all the ring segments are essentially the same size. And you don't have this small keystone. So by doing this to go to a larger size, you don't need a key restraint system. And while constructing the tunnel, you can use the thrust jacks and always keep essentially a thrust jack on these segments for stability. So as a result of this design change, there's a number of necessary specification changes that have to be made. And so those changes, again, are outlined in our memo, but it's really removing the phrase key restraint system and all those requirements that are in the language for those in the specifications, modifying some geometry aspects, etc. I'll say that, just to cut to the chase on this, is that we find these to be really required to support the design change, that is the change in specifications, and pretty consistent with tunneling state of practice. Just as background, there's multiple different geometries of tunnel lining segments that can be used on projects. A lot of this is contractor preference, contractor efficiency. At the end of the day, they behave the same structurally. And so this universal approach on the right-hand side is quite common on projects. And so in fact, the key restraint system was more of a unique system. And so as such, we have no objection to those changes. And in the document from Arup, pages 4 to 6, you'll see a number of red line versions where key restraint must be removed to allow for the new specification. So I'll pause after kind of each of these segments to see if there's any questions on those.
Just out of curiosity, is this design, did you consider it better with the pressures that we're dealing with? Or is it kind of it's more just contractor preference? I just was wondering, is there an advantage to this, just for my personal interest, versus the one design versus the other?
Yeah, so on the left-hand side with the key restraint system, that was, that was created because you had the small key with the pressures that would exist during installation, always wanting to have that key restraint system for every ring. In the right-hand side, you sort of remove the need to add this additional piece. The pressures are still there, but there's another way to mitigate the risk of the pressures in that. So, at the end of the day, it's the same outcome. Contractor preference, they certainly understand the argument to move towards this, and it does improve worker safety.
Okay.
And so, it does make sense from our perspective.
Thank you. That's what I was wondering. Thank you.
All right, so on the second kind of series here, this is PCTL geometry, reducing the concrete strength for type A segments, and then the modifications to the TBM thrust demand. So the original design envisioned a 15-inch thick segment, and if you go back, you can just see the thickness of these segments is 15 inches. Actually, you're fine to stick with the slide there. And that would be the same thickness throughout the 4-mile length of this tunnel. There are 2 design segments. There's a Type A segment and a Type B segment. The Type B segments, they both have steel fiber reinforced concrete. They both have steel rebar sections. That's quite common now. It's just that the Type B segment was more heavily reinforced. That's for the deeper section of the tunnel. The Type A segments have 8,000 PSI compressive strength concrete by design. That's the specification. Type B is 10,000 PSI concrete. Again, pretty normal numbers. And so in the original design and specifications, the thrust load applied by the tunnel boring machine gets pretty high in the deeper part of the tunnel. And so there was envisioned these thrust distribution plates so that the contractor, when they got to sections where the thrust would exceed the allowable stress of those 15-inch thick segments, they would have to use these thrust distribution plates. That was all laid out in the specifications. The new contractor preferred not to use these thrust distribution plates. So working with the contractor, working with contractor designer, designed a thicker segment. So the segments now have increased from 15 inches to 17.5 inches, and the thickness increase of those segments gives them a higher thrust capacity or thrust resistance. And so now there's no need for these thrust distribution plates, or shove plates is another term that's used for that. And so in the specifications then, the change is to remove the references to the thrust plates and to address any changes in there that speak to the increase in segment thickness from 15 inches to 17.5 inches.
Can I interrupt there?
Yeah, please.
The thrust plates are not permanent, but are used during the boring process, or are they permanent?
They are temporary, just
Okay.
used during the boring.
And so, but the modification that you're presenting of increasing the wall thickness in those segments of the tunnel that have the highest stress, from 15 inch to 17.5 inch, that would be a permanent modification.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. If you go back one slide just real quick, just to the point there by Chairman Novak, so you can see if you start that video in the bottom left, those thrust jacks, they're pushing on those segments. That is just a temporary loading that's applied to those segments. And so by making those thicker, not the thrust plates, the segments, then they have greater capacity for thrust jack loading. And so now that those thrust jacks are no longer thrust plates, thrust distribution plates, which would be temporary, are no longer required, the liner ends up permanently being thicker, and therefore has greater capacity for all loads in the ground.
Not only during the boring process, but for the
life of the tunnel. And so the change, the crux of this is the design change by Arup from 15 inches to 17.5 eliminates the need for these thrust shove plates in these Type B segments. Related to this then, the Type A segments, which are towards the shallower parts of the tunnel, they also increase in thickness because you want your tunnel to be consistent from one end to the other. You don't want to step down or step out in thickness. And so they don't need to be that thick from a design perspective, but they are going to be that thick. And so from a redesign perspective, they've reduced the allowable compressive strength from 8,000 PSI to 7,250 PSI. And so that reduction in compressive strength then is reflected in the requested specification changes for the Type A segments. Does that make sense?
Maybe it does to Ruth.
Sorry.
It's counterintuitive to me that when you say you're reducing the strength from 8,000 to 7,200, that is of which component?
So that is of the concrete mix itself, right?
Okay.
It has an allowable compressive strength, which is a force per area. And so if you reduce that from it's 8,000 pounds per square inch to 7,250 pounds per square inch, but then you increase the area, what we're interested in here is kind of the force and the forces in the system. And so by increasing, so backing up, the driver here was to get the segments from 15 to 17 and a half.
Okay.
And so if you increase that then, and you didn't need that increase in strength in the type A segments, then you can back off on the allowable compressive strength, which is a stress kind of parameter.
So if I'm characterizing it correctly, you are netting out the reduction in compressive strength resulting from the change in material with greater thickness that would essentially compensate for and result in no net change or even an additional net strength, making it more resistant to pressure than it would have been had this modification not been implemented to the specifications.
The first half of that was the perfect characterization.
Okay.
Where you're netting by reducing, you're sort of taking away in one area and then adding back in another area. And you end up with an equivalent.
Okay, so it's equivalent, no net increase or decrease in the
Yeah.
overall. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep. Okay, so on pages 7 to 9 in Arab's memo, again, all these are redlined out. You see removing references to these steel shove plates. You see increasing the total installed thrust force in the TBM. You see decreasing this minimum compressive strength for type A. And then you see the additional requirement that exceedance of the thrust jack allowable bearing pressures requires ARIP approval as the designer of record, the designer and engineer of record, and that those things must be supported by actual PCTL strength data. And so, again, we view these specification changes to be necessary to implement their design change, and that design change is brought on by this construction contractor preference to not use these shove plates or thrust distribution plates. That's consistent with industry practice. There's the majority of projects do not use these thrust distribution plates, and so we have no objections to those changes. Okay, so the next section then is the appurtenances. There are 4 PCTL spec changes that are requested that pertain to really accessories in the project. And these are, they can sometimes seem quite trivial, but they're quite important in the context. Everything's important. One is just clarifying the use of packing material and longitudinal, these ring joints to realign out of plane faces when necessary. There are guide rods used to help fit these segments together. Those are temporary and need not be designed for a 100-year design service life, and so that requirement that the guide rods be designed for 100 years has been removed. That plastic spacer should not be used for steel reinforcement in the segments on the inside face of the segments. And then because a unique high-pressure grout socket is proposed for the project, removal of the requirement that the grout socket shall have been used on 5 prior projects in 5 previous years is recommended. And so, again, bottom line, these are, changes 1 through 3 are in accordance with practice. This change 4 of the grout socket, this unique grout socket is needed because of the high water pressures and the high grout pressures on this project. But any new design by nature would not have been implemented on prior projects. But there is specification.
The water pressure that you were referring to there is groundwater pressure, not surface water.
Correct, groundwater pressure, yeah. And in this case, the grout pressure, that when you inject grout outside the segments, when you install these, that grout pressure has to be higher than that water pressure that's felt.
One would hope.
Yes, yes. Well, it's in the specs, it's required. Very important. But that grout socket will be, per spec, will be tested to make sure that it meets its design requirements and its performance objectives. Okay, so good on that. Next one is on fire.
Can you describe for me a little bit more what the testing process for that will be?
Yeah, so they'll build basically a 2-scale grout port with a prototype of this new design, and they'll create an annulus, and they'll inject that annulus through the grout port at the pressures that are called out for in the spec, which is 20 bar.
And how are those pressures simulated?
Well, that's a good question. I'm speculating now. I mean, there's many ways to do that. That's likely going to be in a laboratory where you have a fixed frame system, and then you have a fluid in there, and you're back pressuring that fluid space with a sensor to that, as a measured pressure to that 20 bar level.
Okay.
That's my guess, right? So, but I will say it's a good question. As the testing unfolds, it hasn't been done yet. As the testing unfolds, we'll be provided with, the IQA will be provided with a report on that test and how it's going to be done and how it was done and how it met the spec.
Okay.
All right, so the next section is fire testing. And so a spec addition was included there, essentially to add additional testing samples that will be used for testing for fire resistance. So these segments will have polyfibers, not the steel fibers, but polyfibers. And so additional segments are installed or are included in the spec. So we, of course, don't have an objection to adding test specimens. The next section is on concrete mix design. So now I'm on page 3 of our memo, by the way. And these spec changes are detailed in Arup's page 9. So Enbridge is requesting the addition of a permitted cement type 1TSL, which is a Portland cement limestone slag combination mix design. The reason for this request is due to local availability of supplemental cementitious materials. Slag is a supplemental cementitious material, namely the general availability of slag compared to fly ash. So a bit of background here, I think, is warranted. So the concrete construction industry shifted away from this type 1 Portland cement over the past now 4 to 5 years, including in Michigan. And so this was done after the initially developed joint specifications. So limestone now serves as partial substitute for Portland cement, thus reducing its carbon footprint without adverse response or performance of the concrete. And so the shift is to limestone-based cement is a nationwide trend. MDOT released a special provision in 2021 allowing that substitution. Enbridge requested and you approved, we agreed to that approval, that the addition of Portland cement limestone fly ash combination be permitted in the specification. And so now the current request is essentially to go, to allow the slag replace the fly ash as a supplementary cementitious material. We really looked into this, and in the memo have detailed out the benefits or any potential negatives, which we don't find in the use of slag as a replacement. It's commonly done. And so I think unless you want me to go into the details, I'll just skip that part.
No, I think just based on what the memo presented, it was almost more of a question, why didn't we think of this earlier?
Fair point. Fair point. Okay, so just on that point, I will mention that 2 additions to the list of approved chemical admixtures have also been requested, namely a viscosity modifying admixture and then a workability retaining admixture. These have been approved by Arup, the engineer of record, and will be subject to mixed design testing. And so we have no objections to those again. And Rick Liptak is not here today, but Rick is the chief bridge construction engineer for MDOT, and has been, he's our expert, and his colleagues within MDOT are really our expert on concrete, certainly concrete mixed design allowances and practice in Colorado, in Michigan. And so the important thing here is that their approval, Arup's approval as the engineer of record, and then trial testing, that's very consistent with MDOT's standard specs for construction, section 708. So that's the mixed design piece. I'm over halfway done, by the way.
Okay.
So the next piece is concrete testing. So there's a spec change request to revise the freezing and thawing exposure of the type B PCTL segments from class F2, which means severe exposure to freezing, to class F0, which means no exposure to freezing. And the logic behind this is the type B segments are deep in the tunnel. They're just in the central, they're at least a mile away from the portals, where you're essentially not going to freeze in that depth. And so the request is to do that, and then the specification changes that go with that. So we had no objections to that change.
What would be the lowest expected temperatures when you're boring at that depth?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, below the ground temperature, this thing is being hugged by the ground at those depths, and the ground temperature probably doesn't get below 55, 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
It reminds me, I used to do environmental work on the Copper Range copper mine in the Upper Peninsula, and they actually looked at alternative uses for the underground caverns because they maintained a constant almost temperature of 50 to 55 degrees.
Yeah.
So you would contemplate similar temperatures where these segments of the tunnel are being installed.
Yes, and what that temperature is, couldn't tell you, but it's certainly
Well above
freezing.
freezing, and it also isn't subject to as much fluctuation as surface temperatures.
At that depth, no fluctuation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then I'd say the rest of these on the concrete testing are minor, so I'll just mention we have no objections to those. Those are listed out. Those are in page 10 of Arup's memo. The next section is the tensile strength testing. And so this is page 17 to 18 of Arup's memo where they detail the changes. A modification is requested to add an ASTM standard as a required test method for assessing the splitting tensile strength of the PCTL concrete. And so this would be in addition to the currently specified there's another specification in there. The reason for adding the established specification is that the current specification in there is a draft ASTM. ASTM is the governing board that for standards. There is a draft specification, which is actually a better test, but it's still in draft form. And so the idea here is to add back in the more traditional ASTM C496 split tensile strength test, and then use both of them in concert to meet the requirements for minimum tensile strength. And so we don't have any objections to that for kind of reasons I've just mentioned.
You're using, when you say you're using both, do you mean that the analysis performed would have to comply with both the existing ASTM and the draft ASTM, or that it would only have to comply with either of those two?
Great question. So the first level of language is must comply with both. And I should mention with the ASTM C496, which is the standard method, this would be removing the steel fibers, which actually provide tensile strength or tensile capabilities. But the first line of defense, let's call it, or spec, is to meet both. But there's a clause in there that allows, in the event of discrepancy, there is a clause to allow, per the engineer of record and the data, to allow compliance with one method or the other. Okay. And so we found that reasonable given given both methods and the limitations in the ASTM C496 and standard practice.
When is the governing body for ASTM specs or tests typically has some period when a draft specification is published in draft form, some process to finalize it. Do you know when the contemplated finalization of this particular ASTM tensile strength spec would be contemplated?
I do not. Okay. It's something we can check into and see if they know. These are voluntary committees at ASTM that does this, and so I think their schedule is a bit uncertain as well. We can certainly look into that, and if the time frame of that warrants, it could introduce some further adjustment as well.
Okay. You can keep going.
All right. All right, so a few more here. I'm almost to the end. Concrete handling, so minor editorial corrections are proposed to the concrete handling section. That's on page 12 of ARP's memo. We don't have any objections there. Test standard clarifications, so the specifications have a number of required tests. They just didn't list the AASHTO or ASTM specific test, and so they've added those just for clarity. So we have no objections. And then trial ring tolerance. So whenever you first fabricate segments, you build a ring outdoors, and you demonstrate this thing fits together within the tolerances. And so they've modified some changes to the trial ring tolerances to be more consistent with standard, more recently published tunneling specifications. So the British Tunneling Society specifications is a pretty strong standard for this.
Are you talking
So they're
about
following that.
geometric tolerances?
Yes, geometric tolerances. So we have no objections to that. And then I'd say the last one then is just clarifying under the excavation by TBM spec, there is an existing specification that the required TBM face pressure, that's the counterbalancing pressure against the groundwater pressure, must be at least 20 bars. And that's been clarified so that it is at the bottom of the TBM, the so-called invert of the TBM. So we have no objections to that clarification. So just to reiterate all of those, we find these to be necessary for their design changes and in accordance with industry practice. So as a committee, we have no objections to those changes. Last thing I'll say is that there's probably more to come. Though I can remove the word probably. We will continue to meet with, as the Joint Specs Committee with Enbridge, Arup, and WSP, and address, additional requests that come up from them.
The one change that we discussed a few minutes ago with respect to the grout and the specification for that, and it being subject to testing, what would be the subsequent process by which you would contemplate that testing being performed, our IQA reviewing that testing and concluding that the testing had sufficiently demonstrated the strength of the alternative grout?
You're talking about the alternative grout port.
Yes.
Yeah. So the specs call out the requirements for the grout port, and that the testing must be done. So the general process would be that testing will be done, and that a report will be written on the testing describing what the test is, the procedure, and then the results, and then presumably the meeting that the test results met the specification. That report would be provided to the IQA. And I'd say prior to that, that report would be provided to Enbridge as QA for their endorsement that this meets the spec. And then the IQA would receive that report as well, just to confirm. Is that the question?
Yeah, I think that covers the contemplated way that would be.
Yeah. And I'll just say maybe more broadly is that the IQA will be witnessing some tests. There'll be mixed design tests on the concrete coming up in August is the schedule for that. And so the IQA will witness those. We'll see those tests, which is fairly common for kind of quality assurance to do.
Yep. All right. Do you have any questions?
No, I do not. Thank you.
All right. Are you contemplating a motion for approval of these technical specifications, modifications?
Yes,
Okay.
I guess so.
Let me just say that to the extent we are evaluating these in future meetings, receiving the underlying memo that goes into the detailed description of them with more lead time would be helpful. All right, I'll entertain a motion for modification of the changes to specifications as they were presented by Dr. Mooney.
I so move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those are approved. We now have, as part of our discussion, the process for future changes as it relates to specifications.
Thank you, Chairman Novak. Member Heffer. So the project team between Enbridge and the state established representatives to develop the joint project specifications. Dr. Mooney just elaborated on some recent changes to those. That has been in place since the development of the project and continues as demonstrated by Dr. Mooney. Dr. Mooney represents the state's team on behalf of the project specifications technical working group, and we wanted to memorialize the process that we recommend for clarity between the parties and for clarity to you in your role. I'm going to do a very brief explanation, basically for staff, what it means for staff, and how we would explain how it will be approved in the future. Very much like Dr. Mooney came today, the MOU describes the first item. It's an MOU between the MSCA and Enbridge defining the process for material changes of the jointly developed project specifications. The working group together will determine, either party can recommend a material change and request approval of a material change, but the first item to determine is whether it's a material change. There's no definition within the memo. It will be determined by the working group whether it's a material change. Following that determination, any material change requires approval by the board. If there's a dispute between a material, whether it's a material, non-material change, that decision will come to you. And that is about it. Please, Devin.
So I'll just add, sort of dovetailing with the second item then. The second item would be the delegation of authority
Right.
to the technical team to approve non-material changes.
You're jumping ahead.
Yeah, I know, but it just sort of dovetails when. And then for also determine what needs to come to the board to determine whether it is a material change. The technical team would sort of have that authority inherently to determine something is in fact a non-material change and thus can be approved at that level.
Okay.
I was going, yeah. So, I mean, once things go to construction, and in my past experience, there could be, things go into live motion, and the things you anticipate may not be what you actually encounter. And so the discussion with this was because, you know, for us to review absolutely everything would not be timely for construction, because when things happen, you need an answer immediately. So to deem everything a material change would not be prudent. So the discussion and the delegation is to define the ones that are, what I'd say, when I say material, major changes that have other effects that the experts agree on, that they still come to the board. And then the delegation would be more the minor things that this needs to be tweaked or changed, or anything that are not, have a large effect, I guess is the best way to state it. And so these two documents, what you're saying, are work in unison together. So we've got this one that's the memorandum of understanding, so that we're both on the same page with Enbridge and how these are going to move forward in real time in construction and not delay construction. And then subsequently, in that point, not to delay it, we have our technical experts that are going to be reviewing all the changes, validating what needs to come to us and what doesn't. So it's a marriage of these two documents is what you're saying. Okay, I just wanted to be clear, one for myself and for the public.
Yeah, I think that summarizes it excellently.
And just to clarify further, every change will come to you. The changes that Dr. Mooney just elaborated on, summarized and provided greater detail in the report, those are non-material changes in the view of the parties. So we just wanted to, once again, differentiate between material and non-material. Those are considered non-material. You'll get every bit of information related to why they're considered non-material and how they may, the justification for acceptance and so forth. But with material changes, we will bring a recommendation either way on those. And they'll require formal approval.
In addition to material changes, those for which the parties disagree on whether they're material.
Correct, and then you would make that designation. If there's a dispute between the parties on that topic, that then goes to the existing dispute resolution process in the tunnel agreement, Article 14.
Okay. Anything else with respect to either of those items? The proposed MOU regarding project specification changes or the proposed delegation of authority?
I was going to make a comment if I could.
Go ahead.
One of the things is that some of these things that are material changes timing of those could be critical. So if it has to come to us, there may be a requirement that our board meet and we have another public meeting. And I just wanted to put that out there, that we are sensitive to that, this is very serious. And I mean, if we need to act on it and subsequently come together to make resolution as to what we need to do to move forward. I just want to make the public aware that, construction things are real time, and so we may be considering additional meetings.
Definitely, and that was the purpose of these two items, is to ensure that construction can, if permitted, continue safely and decisions made timely that allow for the continuation of that work. But also that every item is reviewed and thoroughly vetted, and that the oversight is performed in accordance with the tunnel agreement, and then, of course, that those material items do get the proper approval. And we would comply with Open Meeting Act requirements, coordinate with the board, and request your presence.
Thank you for that clarification. And wasn't there also a spreadsheet, like a summary sheet that I didn't see that in this packet here.
Correct. Yeah, so just a form to ensure that all the information required by the tunnel agreement accompanies those changes and those
Okay.
requests for changes.
A continued draft.
And again, that was really to clarify between the parties, just, working between the parties to ensure that we had a procedure that was acceptable to both.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add a little detail on the timing aspect of it, the tunnel agreement contemplates that if Enbridge proposes a material change, we essentially have 30 days to give them a response. And if we don't give them a response within
yes.
30 days, then it's sort of deemed approved and they can move forward with that. So the MOU, consistent with that, provides that same time frame, and Enbridge won't move forward with it unless either they get our approval or we do not act within 30 days. So exactly to your point, Member Hepfer, there may be times where we have to call a meeting together, on shorter notice than we typically do, obviously still well within the notice provisions of the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that clarification.
All right, should we take them one at a time? A motion for approval of the proposed memorandum of understanding regarding project specification changes.
I so move.
Any further discussion on it?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
That is approved. And then the proposed delegation of authority for non-material changes.
I so move.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And that is approved. All right. Where are we on the
Number 7.
agenda? Thank you.
It's me again. But it will be brief.
Not at all.
Simply to note that within the agenda packet, you had several reports received from Enbridge. Their requirement to submit a monthly report to inform the MSCA of their activities. Those have been included, but if you have questions, I'm here to respond to those, and of course, Enbridge is here as well.
No, I think there is in each of the reports that Enbridge provides on a monthly basis kind of a rolling timing sequence things, and I already discussed the relationship between permit issuance and commencement of construction. As we get more clarity on what would be the final permit issuance for the project, when, if those permits are issued, when the obligation for commencement of construction would start. So that is starting to actually loom as potential dates that are going to get triggered. All right. We are on to public comment. How many anticipated, or how many people have signed up?
7 individuals have signed up.
Okay.
And the first is Neil O'Brien, followed by George Ranville.
And just to indicate, there's a contemplated 3-minute limit on public comment in the agenda, but I'm not a strict enforcer of that. If so, I'll just make that observation unless someone is particularly abusing it.
Thank you. To introduce myself, my name's Neil O'Brien. I'm from downstate, down in Lansing. This is my 3rd meeting. I attended the meeting up in St. Ignace last fall and the one in Lansing back in February. This is my first time commenting because I really wanted to listen and learn at the first two meetings. The first thing that I listened to and learned when we were in St. Ignace were primarily a lot of the concerns about the indigenous people that are affected by this, by the location of this project. And I have empathy for their concerns. Because of the limited time that I've got today, I'm not going to talk about the concerns that I join with them. The real reason I'm up here talking today is because at the end of the meeting in Lansing, I walked outside and I saw somebody holding a sign, somebody who didn't speak during public comment, but had a sign that said, "This meeting is a sham." It kind of ticked me off, having listened to the other comments and known what this authority is here to do, to just say this whole thing is a sham, because it's not a sham. Anybody who's watched the presentation today about the engineering marvel that this tunnel will be if it is completed knows that that's not a sham. Nobody in this room wants to see a pipeline with oil on it in our waters because of the inherent danger that that poses. And that's what this project is meant to eliminate. Get it out of the water. Maybe they thought that it was a sham because they thought that you folks are just rubber stamping things. But you're not here to rubber stamp. It was helpful at the meeting in St. Ignace, the first one I attended, to let everybody know kind of the limited role that you all have. You don't have the role to shut down Line 5. That's not in your power. You don't have the role really even to veto this project. We heard about the permits that are being reviewed, and I kind of envisioned the beginning of a drag race when you see that tree of lights, the staging lights, and when the Army Corps of Engineers gives its approval, that's going to light one of those lights. And when the other bodies give their approval, it hits those lights. And once it all those permits are approved, it's a go. And it's your responsibility to manage that project. So I know we're going to hear other people talk, but I hope we just don't hear rhetoric about they want you to shut down Line 5, because that's not going to happen. In a way, it's kind of a waste of this body's time, because if they want to shut down Enbridge's Line 5, they ought to talk to Enbridge to see if there's a reason or a way to shut it down. Or if they want to stop the tunnel project, they ought to talk to the Army Corps of Engineers, or maybe it's too late because of the timing of the public comments. So maybe they need to talk to the EGLE body. But I was impressed by just how important this tunnel project is because of how much oil flows through the Enbridge line. It's like 20 or 25 million gallons per day. We're not going to stop using oil in the near future. There's alternative sources of fuel, but it's not going to solve the need for this type of fuel. So I haven't heard people propose alternatives to the pipeline itself if we're not going to have Line 5. What are you going to do to get those 25 million gallons a day through? You're not going to put them on trucks and have them roll down I-75 or roll across the Mackinac Bridge. You're not going to put them in tankers. This is the only viable solution. And I truly hope that it comes to pass. I don't want the pipeline in the water any more than anyone else does. But I want to say this is not a sham, this body's not a sham. I want to thank you for what you're all doing. I know we're missing one of the members of the authority. People ought to understand that these folks are doing this on a volunteer basis. They get paid their 70 cents a mile mileage and $12.75 for lunch today, I think, is the allowance to do this work. But they put in hundreds of hours of work in between meetings. And I can only imagine how much more work you're going to need when the shovels hit the dirt in the coming year, because you're probably going to have more meetings than you're currently having. But I just wanted to thank you all for the work that you've done and you're going to continue to do. Thank you.
Next is George Ranville, followed by Shannon Redding.
Hi, I'm George Ranville, and I'd like to thank you and welcome you to my council room. I am a council member here in Mackinaw City in the pro tem, so next Thursday I'll be running the meeting and sitting behind the gavel. Thanks for coming up to Mackinac. I've really enjoyed listening to the technical aspects of what's going on with the tunnel. I was a Navy officer, mostly in aviation, but I also slept next to a nuclear reactor for a long time, and I just love the technology. So I love hearing about this, love hearing that there's a military guy involved. There's 3 areas I'd like to quickly talk about. My family has been in Mackinac for centuries, literally centuries. The native side started out as a supporting officer for Grant, General Grant in the Civil War. He was given all the land that is now Burt Lake State Park in return for that. He then went to Sheboygan and was a shipbuilder, one of the founders of the cities of Sheboygan. On my Ranville side, my great-great-great-grandfather retrofitted a schooner on St. Helena Island. His daughter went on to Mackinac Island, where he married Alexander Ranville, who was Captain Alexander Ranville, and he was the captain of the St. Marie, one of the train ferries. And we've been up here for a long time, and we care for the environment, and we love what we can do up here. I had my mountain bike ride out this morning going out towards the headlands, so we use this. My wife's a swimmer. She's going to swim the bridge the end of July. You can come watch her swim across the bridge with 200 people. Second of all, the village has put together and has put out resolutions in support of this project. That was 4 or 5 years ago. I got reelected. I guess we can say that the village of Mackinac supports this project, the school supports this project, and we want to see it go forward. Third, I'm a businessman. I own Beer to Mac Brew Works, which is south of town. We brew beer. We use propane. We have a kitchen. We use propane. Our energy prices continually go up. Our electric rates continually go up. We need this energy for business. We need this energy for delivery of our delivery trucks. And we just want to see this go forward and get those lines out of the water and move on with this project. So thanks for listening to me. And again, welcome. Thanks for coming to Mackinaw City.
Thank you.
I'm Shannon Redding, and this is my husband, John. We're from Levering, Michigan, and we own Northern Lights Family Outfitters, which is a clothing store, and we've been in business for this our 21st year. We actually service more business to business than have a residential store, even though that's what it is, and we have grown with Enbridge, actually. We are family-owned, and we're indigenous-owned. And we have been servicing them for 7 years. Currently, about 500 of their employees actually purchase flame-resistant clothing from us. So what I wanted to speak with you about today, because usually I don't stand up and do this, they hired us not just because of our indigenous background, but because of what it is that we provide. And we provide a service. And what was most impressionable about Enbridge is that when they came to us, we service over, let me explain this, we service over 900 businesses right now with FR clothing, flame resistant clothing. And those businesses usually give their people very minimal safety, and of course it's very expensive. However, what it is that when we met with Enbridge, they said, we don't want a limit to safety. Is that something you can do? Now, I don't know about you as a business owner, but that was kind of like a real eye-opener for me. And I said, no, I'm thinking you're going to want to put a limit and even a monetary amount, and and maybe we do X number of clothing and so forth. And they said, no, that's not what we do for our people. And so it's actually, as you can tell, very emotional in the sense is not because I'm speaking publicly, but what it's done for our business. And so we have went from Levering, husband, wife, 3 kids, to 7 employees. And again, we are servicing not just in Michigan, we service them all across the country. And what's most impressionable about those people that we've been meeting with through this whole process, which has been, I think, 4 years that we've been going to meetings about this Line 5, is that their people are the most humble people that we've ever met. And that goes, there's a lot of faces that are really recognizable here, and I don't want to miss anyone. But that's from all the way from ground up to the very top. And when you meet even those top executives, you don't even know you're speaking with an executive. They treat you like real people. They're very humbled by things that have happened in the past that they've learned from. And then we've even done full tours ourselves. And I think the one thing that the very first public speaker said here that was really impressionable too was that he took the time to learn. And I think that's what the public doesn't do, is they don't really learn what this company is all about, not just what they service, but what they do to make sure that something bad doesn't happen. And this tunnel is not because of something needing to be fixed. It's something to be proactive, to make sure something bad doesn't happen. And so all those things are very, very important for this committee, for all these people to understand. So I just wanted to publicly say that. And I am just so thankful for the business that they have given us and the growth they've provided for us. And I plan on growing with them in the future. And I just hope that everybody can have an open mind. So again, being Indigenous myself, and I understand there's a lot of feedback to that, I'm just thankful that they're protecting our environment and not ruining it. So thank you so much, and thank you for your time, and thanks for all the explanation.
Thank you.
Next is Tom Bachmiller, followed by Kathy Perry. Is Tom still here? Oh. A-okay, we don't mind. All right, next is Kathy Perry, followed by Scott Newman, and lastly, Dan Walsh.
Hi, my name's Kathy Perry, and I'm from St. Ignace, and I'm the president of the St. Ignace Food Pantry. And as a volunteer, I appreciate your time because, you know, it's like having a job. I retired, but it's like having a job. I first want to thank the Enbridge people because they've been generous to the St. Ignace Food Pantry, and we appreciate your support very much. I also very much appreciate and support the tunnel because my husband and I retired in St. Ignace 10 years ago. And when I found out that it was just a pipe going across the bottom of the straits, I'm not an engineer, but I thought, wow, what, you know, how safe is that? I mean, you know, so the idea of putting everything in the tunnel, containing it, makes a ton of sense to me. Plus, we're all talking about this AI stuff now, okay? They need huge and huge amounts of energy to run AI. And that tunnel is going to be able to run more power through it to get, up to the UP to power whatever AI we think we need. But anyway, so again, I just want to thank you for what you do. I want to thank Enbridge for, doing what they're doing, and totally support the tunnel. And also, if you haven't been to the office in St. Ignace, you need to go, because it's great. I mean, they've got they've got the whole thing. It's from me to that camera of how the machine's going to work through everything. I mean, it's awesome. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The last two individuals who signed up are Scott Newman and Dan Walsh.
Good afternoon. Sorry about the garb. I'm just coming off a job. My name's Scott Newman. I am actually the village president here in Mackinaw City. Have been this is my 4th term. I've been in council or in that for almost 11 years. Just want to say that we as a village have signed a resolution years ago in support of the tunnel and getting rid of the Line 5. We think nothing could help us better in the Straits than that. Let's keep it clean. I live here. I've been here for 25 years. Enbridge has been a great neighbor, let's put it that way. In fact, they do train with our police and fire for safety purposes, and they do it on a regular basis. So our village is very involved with Enbridge, and we highly support the tunnel. Let's get it going. I want to see it in the ground. So thank you very much for your time. I'm going back to work. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The last person is not going to speak, so that concludes people who signed
Well,
up.
before we close, are there any additional individuals who didn't sign up that wanted to address the authority? Okay, just thought I'd ask. I wasn't encouraging. Yes.
I have a follow-up comment. To your question earlier during the permit
Yes.
portion earlier, that Enbridge formally reinitiated their reapplication for their permits from EGLE on March. Did they just say March 3rd? Yes.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thanks. All right, if there's nothing else, then we are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.